For a lot of Americans, the idea of traveling, being away from home, is just a routine part of life. Whether it's a business trip or a vacation, getting on an airplane to go somewhere is pretty common. Most of us don't even think twice about it. But that's not everyone. A recent survey of 2,000 Americans revealed some interesting numbers. 13% have never flown in an airplane. 40% of those questioned said they've never left the country. And 11% of these people said that they've never been outside of the state where they were born. Those are some surprising statistics, but the fact remains that a lot of people here in the U.S. still love to travel. And my guest today, Summer, was one of those people. She traveled all over the country as well as internationally, and most of the time it all went fine. What was scary was the time she left the United States and couldn't come back. Real people in unreal situations.
There is a man standing in front of me in my bedroom.
My friend has been shot.
I'm literally inside the river, and I'm inside my car.
He had told me multiple times that he was going to set himself on fire.
If you say my name or try to look at me, I'm gonna kill you.
And he was just sobbing. He said, Mom, tell me you're gonna be okay.
And I jumped on the hood of the car, and I held on.
And I looked into the garage, and he was hanging from the rafters.
I had somebody standing on my neck.
He's better to me dead. I want him dead.
I'm Scott Johnson, and this is What Was That Like? Where did you live back in March of 2020?
I am in Mississippi, which is close to Memphis, and I actually am still here, and my family's here, and I work in Memphis. So I was stationed and based here in Memphis, grew up, raised in this area, work here, but travel all over the world.
And one of the places you traveled is Peru.
Yeah.
And that's because you had a long-term relationship with a man named Jaime. How did that happen? How did you guys come together?
Jaime and I met in January of 2015. I went on a mission trip, and he was one of the local Peruvians there that was helping with our group. He did the logistics and was a translator, just a wonderful person. And we kind of hit it off. And later that year, through the year, we started talking through, internet and just texting on WhatsApp and things like that, FaceTiming a lot. And we started seeing each other exclusively towards the end of the year. But I was there on a mission trip. The first time I'd been in Peru, I've traveled all over for different mission trips and different vacations and stuff like that. But it was the first time that I'd been in Lima, and we were there for a week. Just kind of we really just hit it off. He's very much total opposite of me. I'm very much of a type A personality. He's got that relaxed South American attitude, and we just really hit it off. Great guy. So we had been doing a long distance relationship for 5 years. Long distance relationships are pretty hard, but being on different continents and just that far away, it was really difficult, but we held it together for 5 years pretty strong.
So after 5 years, you are making plans to go and visit him in Peru.
Yes.
And again, this was in March of 2020, and everyone in the world knows now what was about to happen. But all you knew was this mysterious virus was spreading around the world, and major events were being canceled. The NBA and the Major League Baseball canceled their season. But Peru had very few cases in the beginning. Were you at all concerned about making this trip?
Back in December of 2019 was when we started kind of hearing things about this virus in China, and things were getting a little weird over that in that area of the world. I had already booked my flight because that's something, when you're in a long distance relationship, booking flights ahead of time is something that you look forward to. So I had already booked the flight. I was planning to go in March, and December, it was, I was kind of hearing a little bit about it. And then January, February came along. We started, I can remember talking with some friends coworkers at work, and we were kind of like, what's going on? What is this? Like people still weren't sure what was going on. In fact, I had a work trip out to the West Coast a couple of weeks before I was scheduled to go to Lima, and was a little concerned about doing that trip. Not concerned, but just was kind of thinking about it because I think LA had some cases, and just kind of watching that. Peru had very little cases. I'm not fearful, but I'm also not I don't take risk. I'm a planner, and I'm a meeting planner by nature, and just like a planner, just in general, and a type A personality where I like think things through. I looked on the State Department website. It had like, I think, a level 2 warning, which is very low for a country. Just kind of checking out like what, the caseload was for them. I had no reservation about going. Like, again, was a little nervous about doing a trip out to the West Coast more so than going to Peru. Little did I know that when I got there, that tend to be the weekend or the week that what I like to call literally the world shut down.
You fly from Memphis,
Mhm.
and of course that's in Tennessee. You're in Mississippi, so I was wondering how far that is. But now realizing Memphis is just over the line, and it's like 5 minutes from your house, right?
It is. It is. The airport's like very close, and we pretty much fly into Atlanta for anything. So the flight I'd probably been to Lima, and he was living in Lima at the time, still is, and I'd probably been to Lima 10 times at this point plus.
And it was the same flight route each
Same
time,
flight.
right? So you're very
Yep.
familiar with it.
Mhm.
Was there anything unusual about it when you went that day?
There was. So, I get from Memphis to Atlanta, it seemed okay, and then I get to the Atlanta airport, and I mean, we're all familiar. Most of us are familiar with Atlanta being the busiest airport, possibly, probably in the world. I get there, and it's a little light. Like there's not a ton of people there, and I started thinking maybe people are just getting fearful to fly, canceling trips. And then I get on the airplane, and usually the flight is booked, is full. And this time it wasn't because it's just a one way or a one flight a day from Delta. So it's usually full of folks going back to Lima. Or a lot of Americans love to go to Machu Picchu, and you have to fly into Lima to get to Machu Picchu or Cusco. And so I noticed that, and like even joked with there was a couple sitting across from me, and like I kind of sneezed, and I'm like, I don't have COVID. I have allergies, these Memphis allergies, and so nobody was wearing masks at this point. In fact, this was at the point where the government was telling us you don't need to wear mask. Nobody was wearing masks. No one, but the flight was a little light. And again, I was in love, and I was trying to I'm not a risk taker, but I also didn't see any kind of concern to continue on the trip.
What about when you arrived in Lima? Was there anything different then?
They did take our temperature. They had staff, I guess, from the airport or from the government taking our temperature, and that's it. They were not enforcing any kind of stand 6 feet apart or any kind, even mask. As a matter of fact, I'll never forget, we were standing in line, which the customs line took a little bit longer than normal.
And this is in Lima?
This is in Lima at the airport. It's basically the same thing. Every time I went there, you'd get off the plane, you go through customs, they would check you, you pick up your luggage, you go through another section of checking, and then you're basically free to leave. There were a lot of folks waiting in line to get, through customs, and there was a family that was there with homemade masks, and they were made out of like bra cups. And it was, when people at this point were making homemade masks and like different things like that. And that was like, folks were like looking at them like, this is very odd. It was just a weird, weird time. because we were like, what? Like people were still so confused as to what was going on. And they had these homemade bra masks, even with the straps that were strapped on to the pad of the bra. I can remember thinking, I still think about that family. I'm like, I wonder if they got new masks, if they were okay with, being there that way. But we stood in line longer than normal, and that was pretty much it. Like there was nothing besides them taking our temperature, nothing unusual about that.
So Jaime came and picked you up from the airport, and what were your accommodations? Where were you staying?
I was at an Airbnb in Lima in the San Isidro district, which was basically behind his apartment. So I was staying in an Airbnb, which was faced Javier Prado, which is their busiest street in Lima. Lima is a very, very busy city. Lots of people coming in to work, lots of traffic, people out walking. So my Airbnb was actually facing this street that was, lots of things going on. So I was there, and he picked me up. He always picked me up, and we didn't even talk about anything going on with COVID or anything, because it was still kind of like, yeah, and there were no warning signs in Peru that they were going to close or, anything was going to happen. So it was just normal conversation, normal everything, like normal.
So the first day you got there, it's pretty much get some Peruvian food and visit and
Oh,
relax,
yeah.
that kind of thing, right?
It was, and Peruvian food is so great, and his mom is such a wonderful cook. So we were just enjoying our time together. At that point, I don't think we had seen each other for several months. So we were just, together. I got to see his mom and visit with her, and it was a Saturday. I left on a Saturday and did not get there until Saturday night. So the flight landed at about 11:30, 12-ish. And so that next day, which was Sunday, just kind of getting situated for the week and going to talk to his mom and things like that. Later that night, we were playing dominoes, a chicken foot game, and just sitting there. And his brother calls on his phone, and he's like, "Did you hear the president of Peru is shutting the country down in 24 hours?" Jaime's very calm, and he was speaking Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, so I had no idea what he was saying and the conversation, what was going on. And he hangs up, and he tells me, he's like, "My brother's telling me that the president is closing the country down." And I'm like, "Why is he closing the country down?" I'm still like kind of clueless. He said, "Because of the virus." And I'm like, "Well, what do I do?" Like, I had no idea what to do. I kind of was just like awestruck almost. And so I decided to it was probably about 9 o'clock at that point, and I knew that there was a Delta flight, and most of the flights leave later in the evening as a red eye coming back to the States. So I ran upstairs and just threw everything into my bag, just didn't even have time to think. I think I even took like a pillow from the Airbnb, like just stuffing it in there and just trying to get to the airport to get on a flight.
Vacation's over.
Vacation is officially over, and panic's kind of come over me. And I'm just like, what do I do? Like, he's like, "I'll just drop you off at the front. You just run in." So I went up to the front to talk to the Delta agent, and they're like, "This flight's booked for tonight, and it's booked for tomorrow night." And I'm like, I think I was just kind of in shock of like, what is going on? Like, this is just the weirdest. This is just a weird situation that I couldn't call up somebody and say, "Hey, have you ever been stuck in a foreign country during a pandemic? What did you do?"
Yeah, there's no precedent for this at all.
There's not. It's not nothing like that. So I get back into the car, and he takes me back to the Airbnb. I mean, I'm defeated. Like, I'm like, because I always have a plan A, B, C, and D. And I'm like, there's no plan. Like, there's like, what's going to go on? So it was tough, like not knowing what to do. And you're responsible, for getting yourself home, basically.
How did you let people know back home did you call your parents, or what? How did you contact them?
I did. So they were my first call. I think, one of the biggest things for me was having my parents worry. I was safe. I was fine. I was with people that I knew. Besides being in a foreign country during something that's so odd and weird, I wasn't hurt. I wasn't sick. I wasn't in any harm. It was just the anxiety of being in this foreign country and your family being somewhere else worrying about you. That was probably a sad thing for me. My dad is a retired police officer, so he was really cool and calm about everything, of course. But my mom, I'll always be her baby, and I could tell in her face that she was worried. So I calmly told him, I was like, okay, this is the situation. The president is shutting the country down, and nobody can go in or out. Like, no flights, no foot travel, no cars, because we had considered like this whole, in 24 hours, we're like, well, I can fly to Colombia, another country within South America. Maybe like he could drive me over to Ecuador and I could take a flight from there. But then I was like, well, what happens if Ecuador shuts down? I'm stuck there with no one, like it was just kind of a stay put kind of situation and see how it basically plays out. My family, of course, they trust Jaime, and they, knew that I was in good hands and I was okay. But it was, I hate that I put them through that. Like, I don't like that feeling of them being worried. And it was a scary time for everybody, whether you were in a foreign country or home country. Like, it was just scary for everyone.
So I would think at that point, there's a U.S. embassy in Peru. Can you contact them or the State Department, or how did you go from there?
That was interesting. The first couple of days, there was nothing, like there was no message put on their Facebook page or their website. There was nothing that gave any indication of this is what you need to do or we're working on this situation. I do recommend that if anybody ever goes out of the country, to register yourself through the State Department, because eventually we were given that message. You need to register yourself through the State Department to let them know that you're a citizen outside of the United States, and they can give you, like, I still get emails about things going on in Peru. They give you notes about, like, if there's an earthquake or, just a demonstration or something, just to kind of warn the citizens. So I eventually had to sign myself up for the State Department notifications. But my main source of information came from a Facebook group of Americans who were stuck in Peru. And that's how I eventually got home, because of the information that I received from that group. It was wonderful. Like, the information that I received and how we came together on that site was valuable, very, very valuable.
How many people were in that Facebook group?
Oh, thousands. I mean, anybody could get in there. Family members. There were so many, like, moms and dads in that group where they had sent like their 19, 20-year-old kid to, backpack in the mountains of Peru, and they were stuck. That's one thing that was sad about being in the group, because you saw so many desperate people. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to stay. I was in a situation where I was taking care of the folks at the Airbnb, let me stay there as long as I needed to and discounted the rate. But there were tourists there that were either like coming home, and just their timing was terrible, like they were leaving the day of or whatever, and they just got stuck and they had nowhere to go. It was pretty heartbreaking to hear some of the things, especially the Americans that were, and not only Americans, there were people from all over the world stuck in Peru, being stuck in Cusco, which they had to get from Cusco to Lima to get back home, because their airport could not accommodate, like flights going to different countries. But it was, some of the stories that were in that group about people being in Cusco and being doused with bleach by the government, and, some people testing positive for COVID and being locked in the room and not being able to leave or do anything. It was really heartbreaking to see some of that stuff.
It sounds like a group like this would somehow make the news in the U.S. that, wow, all these U.S. citizens are stuck. Did it get the attention of politicians or someone who could help?
It did. We had a few people, the admins of the group really kind of took the lead of being like several of us contacted CNN, all the major news outlets. I know a few of the folks that were the admins were on CNN, did like FaceTime, like kind of Zoom interview.
Were the admins in the U.S. or were they stuck too?
They were stuck too. Most of them were stuck in Cusco. So they were there kind of leading the way of getting the attention because we were like, so we knew that there were other countries that were kind of closing like Peru was, but to our knowledge, Peru was the strictest. Like there were not a ton of other countries where they were not letting anyone go in and out. Like Peru was very, very strict with their COVID quarantines and restrictions and things like that. So we kind of band together and we were like, well, we need to get the attention. I contacted my representative here in Mississippi and my senator, and my representative, Mr. Kelly, his team worked very hard to keep me updated and gave me information of what was going on. The ambassador for the U.S. to Peru left at the beginning when, like, the day of they found out that they were closing the country. He took a flight out with the Peace Corps and left. And that was just like it was such a downer for all of us on the group page. We're like, he just left. Like it felt like the captain was leaving the ship.
That's exactly what it was.
It was. And it, like, I don't know the reasonings behind why he left. And then, like, it felt a little chaotic. It felt like it wasn't really being. I majored in public relations, and we always had a plan for everything, kind of like having a backup plan for any kind of disaster or anything like that. And I would have thought that the embassy would have had like a binder with, a natural disaster, a pandemic. No, this is what you do. Go to tab A, and I didn't feel like that was at that point. Like, and then with the ambassador leaving, it was really a punch in the gut. And we're kind of like, what do we do? So we band together on this Facebook group and contacted as many people. I have a friend that used to work for Anderson Cooper, and I was like, hey, can you reach out to your friends, see if they want to pick this up? Like, this is something that we need to let people know about, that we're stuck here. And it's, there's no way we're going to get home unless the government intervenes and sends planes or talks to the Peruvian government.
Do you ever find yourself listening to a podcast and hearing a story like this one with Summer, and you think, man, I love hearing stories like this. Why don't more podcasts have this kind of content? And I agree. These firsthand stories are amazing. That's why sometimes listeners will contact me and ask, are there any other podcasts like this? And my answer is always yes. You need to check out the show called This Is Actually Happening. That's a podcast that I've been subscribed to for years, and it's the first one I came across that's most similar to my podcast. In fact, I connected with the host of This Is Actually Happening, Whit, and we did a full episode trade a couple years ago, and that was a huge success because our podcasts are so similar. Whit finds people who've been through something really unbelievable, and he gets them to tell their story. You'll hear people talking about a wide variety of situations, like a son who gets shot by his own father, a woman whose sister develops multiple personalities. There was even an episode with a man who woke up not knowing where he was, and he was actually in the morgue. Yeah, that would be a bit disconcerting. This Is Actually Happening is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app. You can also check out the website at thisisactuallyhappening.com. Listen to an episode or two, and you'll be a fan, just like I am.
being with Jaime, and he's, from that area, and he always tells me, Summer, you can't act like an American here. You have to, I'm always liberty and freedom. And he's like, especially during this time, you're going to have to be, kind of not be that way. And again, this was a time when we were told you don't have to really wear masks. I didn't even have a mask. Like, that was a concern while I was there. I was like, where do you get masks? Like, do y'all have masks here? Like, I'm sure they did in the pharmacies.
Well, they had bras, right?
Yeah, they yes. They definitely did that, and I could have resorted to doing that if I needed to.
See, you had masks with you the whole time. You didn't even know it.
Exactly. But we were in the grocery store one time, and a police officer came up to me and said something to me in Spanish, and I was like, I don't understand. I'm sorry. And he was like, pointed like, get your mask on. So that was only, the only time. And then of course the news, not only the American news, but like the Peruvian news was showing, tanks blocking off streets. And I didn't see any of that. And I mean, I did, being in a foreign country and not knowing necessarily the rules, and like if you get put in jail, just different things like that. That was a concern, but again, not a risk taker, so I wasn't out, boycotting anything. Or, I stayed in the Airbnb, which was hard for me because I like to go and be out in the, walking and things like that. And it was really eerie because the city basically shut down. They had a curfew, so you couldn't be out at like 9 o'clock. You had to be in your house or your apartment. I mean, even people walking their dogs, they would get onto them or put them in jail if they were out past the curfew. Javier Prado, the street was dead. Nothing. No cars, no transportation, no taxis, nothing. That was a little creepy. A city that was so bustling and busy was basically dead. Everybody was in their apartment. So as the days went on, people were chattering on the Facebook group, and they said, you need to sign up with the State Department, and they'll call you. They'll ask you if you're still interested in going back to the United States, and then they'll assign you a day to come up to the embassy, and they'll put you on a flight, and you'll go home, basically. So I actually was standing in line to get into the grocery store because they had started implementing, just a few people in the grocery stores at the time. And we were standing in line to go to the grocery store, and there was another American behind me, and we just started talking about it. And he was, of course, stuck there. And we became friends on Facebook. We just following the Facebook group and trying to get, they had even started a Google Doc sheet of, on our own, your name, just different information. And they were providing it to the embassy, but also sign up through the State Department to get home. And so this guy, like a couple of days later, he sent me a message, and he was just like, hey, just want to let you know, I just happened to go up to the embassy and they got me on a flight and I'm going home. So you may want to try doing that. So I got up the next day ready to go, and Jaime was able to take me to the embassy because he had a cousin that was a police officer, and the police officer basically escorted us to the embassy, because there were roadblocks of police officers asking, like, why are you out? Where are you going? If not, I would have had to have taken an Uber to the embassy. So we went there, and I stood in line for about 2 to 3 hours in front of the embassy, and got to the front, and like literally about 2 people missed it for that day. They were taking, which I totally respect, and it's fine. They were taking elderly people. I saw a pregnant woman who looked like she was about to give birth. Like it's like, go, kids. It's kind of like the Titanic thing, like women and children in the front kind of thing. So I was fine with that, but it gave me an advantage because I actually talked to the embassy. And at this point, things were more organized. It was like getting to be a well-oiled machine for them. The State Department had sent down a diplomat, Julie Chung. We actually kind of had a joke on our Facebook group. It was like hashtag save us Julie, things like that. But they sent her down there. They had all branches of the military there. I believe they brought in the DEA, the drug enforcement folks from the jungle, because we have like the United States have people stationed, I guess, all over the world for stuff like that. Brought them in from the jungles of Peru to kind of help get us situated. So the embassy got it together and very helpful, very kind. If anything, that day, it got me on their radar. Like, they're like, okay, she is here. She wants to go home, kind of thing. And later that night, I got a call from somebody at the State Department and said, okay, you're on the next flight the next day. You need to be at the embassy at 8 and just bring your luggage, all your documents, and we'll get you on a flight.
That's the reassuring phone call you wanted to get.
Yes, yes. And, I had a panic moment like that whole day. I was like, what if they try to call me and it won't go through on my phone? And like you have those panic, like, am I going to miss it? Kind of thing. But they were able to get through. And when I got the call, I was like, yes, I want to go home. Please put me on that flight. I'll be good to go.
And that flight was the next day?
Yes. The flight was the next morning, and I arrived, and there were people already standing in line, ready to go. The Mormon faith had their young missionaries there that were leaving. So I probably was the only non-Mormon on this flight going home. And I knew that it was pretty bad because, again, like, everybody's still kind of confused as to what's going on in the world. Like, I mean, we know it's because of the virus now, but just, I was catching up with mom and dad back home about what's going on there. And they're talking about people hoarding toilet paper. And I'm like, what a weird time to be alive. Like, it's just like that stuff wasn't really happening there. Like, they were, we had to stand in line to get in the grocery store and stuff like that. But I knew when I saw all the Mormons sending their missionary folks home, I was like, this has got to be bad. Like, this is really serious. But I stood in line for a couple of hours, and you get to the front and they process your paperwork. And then we waited on a bus for about another hour or two while we were, before I got on the flight. We had heard through the Facebook page that they were going to send like military planes to come get us, which was kind of a weird thought. But they ended up contracting out like United and I believe Delta to come basically take us home. At this point, to me, it felt like it was an exchange of tourists or citizens, because when we got to the Air Force hangar, which we didn't go through the normal process of going home, like through the airport, like you go through security. We didn't do any of that. We were taken on buses, and like 3 to 4 charter buses, and the U.S. military were there, very to the point, like, this is what we're going to do. You're going to get on this bus, and then you're going to get off this bus, and you're going to wait in the same, like, it was very rigid, but it was a welcomed kind of structure. So we get off the bus and we sit in a huge hangar, which is the Peruvian Air Force hangar, and wait there for another couple of hours while they process us. We had our luggage with us, and we literally just sat there while the dog came through to sniff, security reasons. And then the Peruvian government came through and stamped our passports so that it showed that we left the country, because if not, then it would be all, messed up. So that was all processed, and we got on the flight, and they dropped this particular flight off in DC. So they told us you can we didn't know until like the day of, but they would say you'd either be dropped off in DC or you'll be dropped off in Miami. And once you got back into the United States, you had to find your way back to your home. So once you were done, once they did their duty, you were on your own.
Then it's a planes, trains, and automobiles situation.
Yep, exactly. And I will say this, Delta really was a shining star in this whole situation. I talked to them probably 15 times over the course of being there. And every time, they couldn't really do anything because they couldn't bring a plane in. But I was just like, hey, I've got to cancel my flight, because they kept rescheduling the flights, which was so frustrating. Like, these commercial airlines weren't sure what's going on. So they just would keep canceling the flight and then rescheduling it for the next week and then canceling that, And so every time I'd call them, they were like, we are so sorry. Like, if there's anything else I can do for you, let me know, but we can't get you home, basically.
So did you fly back on Delta or United?
I flew back on United. The government contracted United to get us out, and they dropped us off in DC. And then that's where I called Delta, and I was like, hey, can you get me back to Memphis? And they were on it, and they got me home.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. I remember back when I first started podcasting, because it was kind of overwhelming. Which mic to use, how to record a conversation online with a guest, how to find a guest to talk to, how to edit the audio, all those things. It felt like 100 problems just hitting me all at once. So I got some help, and I was able to figure out the solutions to every one of those issues. And I can tell you, when you find the solution to a problem, it feels amazing. And that's true in life as well. A therapist doesn't just magically make your problems disappear. Instead, they can help you become a better problem solver, and that makes it easier to accomplish your goals, whether they're big or small. For a lot of the stories you hear on this show, the reason the guest is here is because they've gone through something really traumatic, and for many of them, their mental and emotional healing came from therapy. Maybe you've been thinking about giving therapy a try to see how it might help. I can tell you, BetterHelp is a great option. It's entirely online. You can do it on your own schedule, and it's less expensive than traditional in-person therapy. You just sign up and get matched up with your own professional therapist. So there it is. When you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit betterhelp.com/whatwas today, and you'll get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/whatwas. And thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
We had to pay for the flights, which I expected. I did not expect taxpayers to have to pay for the flight to get home, but they said it would be what a flight would be to Lima, which is not necessarily true, because it was a pretty hefty fee. If we didn't pay it within a time, we had to pay it to the State Department. If we didn't pay it within time, our passports would be revoked, and we'd have to pay it. So basically, we owed the government for that flight, which, again, I expected that, and I would want to do that. I did not expect a free ride, but not at the price that they made us pay.
Do you want to say what the price was?
It was $1,500 for a flight, and it's not that much.
No, for a flight that would normally be, probably Lima to Miami, maybe 500.
Oh, probably even less. Yeah. I'd paid from Memphis to Atlanta, Atlanta to Lima. The most I've ever paid was $800. That was during like a peak season. Yeah. So when I got that bill, I was like, oh my goodness, I'll pay this, but this is uncomfortable.
Yeah, boy, you're not in a good negotiating position at that point.
Nope, not at all. At that point, you're just like, I'll give you my firstborn if you just get me home.
So how did you get from DC to Memphis? How far is that?
I had to fly through Atlanta again, and it was probably just a couple hours flight, and I had to stay over in DC because after a day's worth of just waiting and then getting on the flight, because it's about a 6.5-hour flight from Atlanta to Lima. So it's not a bad flight at all, but DC is just a little bit further. So it was about a 7-ish hour flight. And then I had to stay overnight in DC, get up. I was on the first flight back home. I probably could have stayed in the airport and then came through Atlanta to get home to Memphis. And wow, you want to talk about, again, creepy, like, no one was in the Atlanta airport, not hardly anyone coming back. And I was just like, man, this is this is so weird. This is just like you're just in this like bubble, kind of like your head's in a fog. Like you've just spent, 19 days trying to get home, and then you come back to your home, and it's like I feel like I'm in a different land or something. Like it was just odd. It was off.
But at least you're back in the U.S. and of course,
Yes.
domestic flights, are going to be easier to arrange than international at that time, anyway.
And at that point, I was like, if I have to drive, because there was some uncertainty about even domestic flights being available. And my parents were like, we'll come pick you up wherever. I had family members, friends, that were like, we'll come get you wherever you are. And so it wasn't, as long as I could get back into the United States, I knew that I could get home. So that wasn't a concern.
Probably some people, live in California or somewhere out west.
Oh, yes.
And they still had to find their way home as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right.
From the time you arrived in Lima until you finally got back home, how much time had passed?
It was exactly 19 days. So I left on Saturday, March the 14th, and I did not get home until Wednesday, April the 1st. So it was 19 days, and it was 19 days of pure like anxiety of what do I do? Who should I contact? Like, am I missing something? And I knew I would eventually get home. Like it wasn't a feeling of I'm never going to get home, but it was just a feeling of what do I do? How does this kind of work situation?
Yeah, I can imagine that. I mean, I'm myself like you, I'm a planner. I like to have
Yes.
everything set out and I know what's going to happen. And so I get a little bit stressed out just traveling normally. But
Mhm.
in a situation like this, I mean, that's just off the charts.
Yeah, it was a different feeling, and it's kind of odd because I went to Italy one time for a friend's wedding, and we actually got stuck there for about 48 hours, and that was a little stressful, just this situation of getting home that way, and then like this happens, and people were like, "You're not going out of the country ever again. You're staying here." And I'm like, well, it gets built character,
Right.
it helps you better.
But nobody wants to travel with you though, right?
No, they don't. They don't. They're like, no, thank you. No, thank you.
Would you have done anything differently looking back on it now, or do you have any regrets about any part of it?
I do. I wish that I had seen that time with Jaime I wish I had seen that I was having more time with him. We didn't know at the time that we would not see each other for 2 years. In this past March will be 2 years since we've seen each other. The Peru's still very much, they're pretty strict. They were very, very strict. They've kind of let up a little bit, but quarantine measures and the whole situation for them was very, very, very strict. So I couldn't go to see him, and due to immigration, which is very difficult doing it the right way, he couldn't come here because he has to have a visa. So I think God gave us that extra time to see and be with each other. And I kind of spent it obsessing about how am I going to leave, and I wish I had spent more time enjoying that time with him instead of not panicking. It sounds like I was like constantly fretting. We watched a lot of Netflix, but did some, we worked out. We did like some workout videos on YouTube. I cooked a lot because you couldn't really go out of the apartment, and like, we walked around the neighborhood with our mask on and things like that. But I wish I'd had spent more time with him and enjoyed that time.
That's kind of what inside the US or outside the US, that's kind of what people remember about those early months is Netflix
Yes.
and Tiger King.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And poor Jaime was like, what is wrong with you Americans? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm like, these people, their lives are like way worse than what I'm going through right now. It's making me feel a little better. So, and I can see where people being quarantined and cooped up in their house, because that's what we had to do. And again, I get back to the United States, and people are still doing that somewhat, but we're able to freely go walk in a park, or here where I live, it wasn't as strict as even some areas in the United States. So having that freedom back again, and I know that sounds so silly, but being somebody that likes to go, I could see where people who are quarantined or in, staying in their apartments get so depressed and like just so sad, and like it changes you mentally. And that was something that was a little scary for me, because I was like, I can't stay in this Airbnb all day long just sitting here like watching TV. Like I need to get out. I need to breathe fresh air, kind of thing. So that was something that was a little different for me. And then getting back home, I enjoyed being able to get out and drive my car and like do things like that.
When you fly now to Peru or really anywhere outside the U.S., do you ever have it in the back of your head that something like that might happen again?
Well, I haven't been out of the country since this incident. I told my mom, I was like, after I came back, I'm like, I have a little bit of, PTSD or, kind of issues. Like it's going to be a long time before I go back to Peru or leave the country. I travel within the United States, of course, for work and things like that. But yeah, I definitely will think about that, kind of have a game plan, and if it wasn't for the U.S. government coming in to get us out, I'm not going to say we'd probably still be there, because we eventually could leave, but it would have been months and months. So yeah, I do think about things like that. And eventually one day I'll get back into traveling outside of the United States, and will probably sign up for the State Department, whatever country I'm going to make sure I get notifications and to make sure that they know that I'm there, kind of thing.
I wasn't aware of that. That's really good advice to register yourself, just so they know, that you're there. That's a good idea.
It is. And it's funny because like I always think, it's our responsibility. Like once you leave the country, the government really doesn't necessarily have to come help you. Like it would be nice if they do, but in a situation like this, government intervention had to happen for us to get out. Peru was not letting, they only let like, I want to say, I think 10 flights out per day from a country. And like, I think the United States had 3 to 4, if my numbers are right. I know when we were waiting in the hangar, I saw a Swiss airplane, Israeli airplane, the Mexican airplane, but the United States had a majority of those airplanes. And it took a diplomat and the president of the United States and his staff to basically negotiate, hey, we need to get these folks out. So at that point, we had to have the government intervene, because there was no way we could have done it on our own.
So politicians actually did something good for once.
They did. Going through this whole immigration process, I've been kind of jaded with government stuff. Things have gone so wrong with that. And my representative from the state of Mississippi really, it kind of was a light for me to say, okay, they are helping, they are serving the public. So it made me see that, if anything, that I learned that the government is not all that. It's like they were helping, and I'm very appreciative of that.
Doing their job, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's hope that it doesn't happen again.
Oh, no.
Thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
There's an interesting side note about this story. You heard Summer talking about that Facebook group she was in with the people who were stranded in Peru and their family members. Well, one of the people in that group was a celebrity. It was Dee Snider, who's an actor, a songwriter, and probably best known as the lead singer in the band Twisted Sister. He was in this Facebook group because his daughter was stuck in Peru. I reached out to Mr. Snider to see if he'd like to provide some perspective on his experience during this time, but his management team advised me that he would unfortunately not be able to participate in the podcast episode. And now I have some big news, and it has to do with my mom. Her name is Karen. If you've listened to past episodes of this podcast, you may have heard my mom. I brought her on the show around the time COVID was just starting to go crazy and everyone was staying home. Here's a clip from the opener of episode 48.
Hello, my name's Karen. I'm 77 years old and I'm Scott's mom.
Yep, that's my mom. I'm an optimist, and I inherited that from her. She lives about 5 minutes from me in a condo that she and my dad bought about 3.5 years ago. They moved in, and were only there about 3 days before my dad went in the hospital and passed away shortly after that. So she lives there alone, and we see her pretty regularly. But now we have this virus situation, and we all have to stay home. What does she do all day? Well, she stays pretty busy.
I like to start my day by taking a walk. And when I get back home, I sometimes have a list of things that I want to accomplish during the day. Sometimes I do them, sometimes I don't. I'm retired, so I can do what I want.
Did I mention she stays busy?
I can mop the floors and dust, or I can get on my computer and play games. I can call a friend. I can encourage them, and I get phone calls. I can do jigsaw puzzles on my computer. I can play games on my phone. I'm catching up on my reading.
But wait, there's more.
Reading my Bible through this year in chronological order, and I'm taking Bible courses on BBN. I do laundry. Sunday we have lunch together. I have lunch together with family on Zoom. I do the ladies' Bible study on Tuesday night on Zoom. I do another ladies' Bible study on Wednesday night on Zoom. And Saturday morning, I do Weight Watchers on Zoom.
Holy cow, my mom is retired and she's busier than I am.
Well, I don't do all that every day.
This summer, my mom just had her 80th birthday. She still walks a couple of miles most mornings, and she's doing fine. Every so often, she has everyone over to her place for a game night. So it's me and my wife and our 2 kids, and my brother's family with their boys and a girlfriend. And I say kids, but of course they're all adults now. Anyway, a few weeks ago, she invited everyone over, and we're all there just kind of chatting. And Mom announces that she has something to say to all of us. She has an announcement. Well, that got everyone's attention. We're all wondering, what's going on? What are we about to hear? That's when my mom told us the news. She's getting married. And I'd have to say that that's probably the biggest surprise I have ever had. I never would have predicted that. None of us would have. So who is this guy? Her soon-to-be new husband? His name is Jim. His family and our family have been friends literally my whole life. Jim and his wife Janet had 3 girls, and in our family we have 3 boys, and we all grew up together in Ohio. They were over at our house, we were at their house. Jim and my dad worked together, and we were always just very close. At some point, when I was a teenager, they moved to Indiana, and then later we moved to Florida, but we've always kept in touch. Jim's been alone since Janet passed away in 2019. So here we have these 2 people, both still in good health, who have known each other for something like 60 years. And even though no one could have guessed it, it really does make perfect sense that they would get together. And yes, since Jim has 3 girls and my mom has 3 boys, there have been mentions that this is a real-life Brady Bunch. We're all really happy for them. The wedding is November 12 of this year, 2022. If you'd like to send them a card, you're welcome to. Just send it to Karen and Jim, care of my address, which is P.O. Box 5, Safety Harbor, Florida, 34695, and I'll pass it along to the newlyweds. So enough of the personal stuff. Let's get on to this week's listener story. We end each episode of the podcast with a story that's been sent in by a listener. It can be funny, sad, inspiring, whatever. So if you have something interesting that you can tell in about 5 minutes, record a voice memo on your phone and email it to me, scott@whatwasthatlike.com. This week's story is going to make you smile. Stay safe, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Hi, Scott. My name is Samantha, and I just was listening to your bonus episode of Childbirth Stories, and one thing was missing. my story. My second child, my son, was extremely healthy throughout the pregnancy. There were no indications of any health issues at all. The labor was fairly quick, and I wouldn't say easy, but he came out with no problem at all. I looked down at him and I said, "Oh, he has Down syndrome." And I remember very vividly the midwife shushing me. And I looked back at her and I said, look at him. Look at his eyes. They're almond shaped. They're beautiful, but he has Down syndrome. And I have to say that at that moment, it probably was the most frightened I've ever been and the most unsure. I had so many questions about what this child would be like. Would I be able to take care of him? Would he love me? Would he be able to speak? So many ridiculous thoughts that came through my mind. And I can say today that he is 9 years old and the greatest blessing of my life. I have grown so much as a person just being able to be his mother. He is smart, he is funny, he is mischievous, and my favorite part of his birth story is when I ask him, when you were born, what was the first word that you said to mommy? And he says, surprise!